Hi, everyone. My name is Lucy Ritchie, and I'm the host of Heal Podcast. I'm very excited today because we are welcoming none other than Wendy Maltz. She is the well-known author of the book, The Sexual Healing Journey. And today she's here to talk to us about intimate connection after sexual trauma. So Wendy is an internationally recognized sex therapist, author, and speaker with more than 40 years of treating people with sex and intimacy concerns. Although we do discuss her book, The Sexual Healing Journey, she's written many books. She's also the author of The Porn Trap, which is the essential guide to overcoming problems caused by pornography. She's also the author of Private Thoughts, which is subtitled Exploring the Power of Women's Sexual Fantasies. She's currently retired from providing counseling services, but she does remain engaged in the field through her popular educational website, www.healthysex.com, which provides free articles, interviews, videos, and more to help people overcome sexual problems, and of course, to develop skills for love-based sexual intimacy. And as we always do on this show, there's lots of psychoeducation around sexual trauma, also around the trap of not feeling good enough and how that can be really objectifying. So enjoy the show and feel free to send us a comment, subscribe at healpodcast.com. You can even download lots of resources there. I have a free ebook. Enjoy the show. I'm so excited to have Wendy Maltz here. She is the author of The Sexual Healing Journey, which is a guide for survivors of sexual abuse. I'm holding the third edition of the book, which when I bought it said it sold more than 175,000 copies. I'm sure it's increased a lot since then. How are you?
I'm fine. Nice to see you again. Yes.
Nice to see you too. We have such an important conversation. I'm really excited to dive in. When we met, we started talking about trauma, of course, sexual trauma, and how can we reconnect with our partners intimately, and even with friends and being social after these experiences. And so one of the things that we had talked about was the triphasic model, which is Dr. Judith Herman's model for treating complex trauma, but also acute trauma, which is we need safety, we need processing, we need to process the trauma, and then we need to reconnect. So reconnection is like a reconnection to ourselves, but also to others. And this particular phase is something that you're very familiar with and your work really lies in. So I was wondering if you can, first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this work in the first place. And then, we can just dive into some of that reconnection.
Okay, well, I'm going to sound pretty old to a lot of people. I've been around for a while. I started work in the late 1970s and was involved with the women's movement back in the mid-70s as director of the Berkeley Women's Center. And at that time, we were doing Take Back the Night marches, which women would get out in the street and march for safety from sexual assault. And it was the first kind of awakening of that awareness that sexual assaults were going on. They've been going on forever, for generations. And the seriousness of the impact of that on people and how it can rob, especially women, of things like assertiveness, self-confidence, a feeling of being able to live in your body and be able to connect with someone else. So I became aware back then of the issues with sexual abuse. I am a survivor myself. And then I got fascinated with the field of sex therapy because it was so neat. It was like a behavioral approach. And it wasn't just talk therapy. In the past, I used to think you could just talk your way out of trauma, the impact of trauma, by sitting down, talking with a therapist, and just experiences in general in terms of intimacy. You could talk your way into better sexual relating. But the field of sex therapy developed a number of different neat exercises the primary ones are called sensate focus. And you can Google it and look it up. Masters and Johnson developed those. And they really involve things like massage and not relating sexually right away and dealing with sexual functioning issues real directly at first, but rather working your way up in steps, progressive steps that involve desensitization. I thought, wow, this is great. And when I became a therapist in the late 1970s, I developed a specialty in sex therapy. And lo and behold, when I started working with survivors, these sex therapy techniques had problems. And it was like, what is going on? How come this population is having such a struggle with it? And I realized that the techniques were too much, too soon, and too sexual. And there was a lot of developmental work. I know the NARM model has a strong emphasis on the human development and development of self component. And a lot of that was missing in terms of people feeling comfortable in their own bodies, comfortable with their sexuality, comfortable with speaking up about what their needs were in a sexual experience, and even knowing themselves what their needs were. So I ended up doing a lot of research in this area. My first book was Incest and Sexuality. It was such a groundbreaking book. It was a professional book more. And my son's second grade teacher asked me if I would come to the class and speak about what it's like to write a book. And I went, oh, what? That's a pretty heavy topic. And that's because my son, when he communicated to the teacher, she thought he had said insects and sexuality.
Oh, okay.
And then I was an insect specialist. So that's how crazy it was at the time.
Yeah.
And, unheard of to even talk about these issues openly. And so I ended up developing over the years that I practiced for 40 years, techniques that could help survivors to essentially modify sex therapy and do a progressive approach that would come before even getting physical in that recovery process. Because I realized that survivors had a different idea of what sex is. They had kind of combined sex and sexual abuse as one thing. So when they talked about sex, they didn't distinguish it from healthy sexuality. If sex abuse had become their idea of what sex is and what is expected of them. And that, of course, doesn't work, right? Who wants to do that for the rest of your life?
Yeah, it sort of, gets ingrained as associated with something that, is traumatic, and maybe I have to just get through, and instead of really take the time to be able to receive pleasure and explore what pleasure feels like. It's not, there's a word that in polyvagal theory, it's not accessible, because it's sometimes, yes, it's beautiful. It's something that we're drawn to, right? We want to have sex. It's part of, what our biology tells us to do. But then there's a lot of conflicts going on with the retuned nervous system, because after sexual abuse, the nervous system is retuned to anticipate threat. And especially now we're going right back to where that threat was. Of course, we're going to approach it with strategies to overcome it, like performing. Like that's a big thing that can happen in the sexual space, because it's like, okay, this doesn't feel safe. So there's a bunch of different strategies that can happen when we're not feeling safe enough to get over that vulnerability and get into accessibility.
Performing in my book, The Sexual Healing Journey, I say there are two directions that tend to go on. I think the performing, that is the terminology you're using, but I use like sort of compulsively drawn to sex, or doing it as like acting it out, as opposed to feeling it like this fits with who you are, and then dissociating. And they're really, or withdrawing from sex. And it's all a form of dissociation if you're acting out or if you're pulling away from sex. You're wanting to not really be there during it, and having that ability to access the desire for initiating activities that are pleasurable that you 100% feel comfortable with.
And so when you say it's, you're titrating into it, so kind of taking these really small baby steps into becoming intimate, right? These are really small steps and I love them. Because, you're starting with, I was looking at some of your work and, there's hand holding, right? There's drawing on the back. And I find, when I think of intimacy, never mind sex and never mind actually connecting physically with someone in that sexual way, but getting back to the intimacy part, the nurturing, the feeling safe and drawn to the other person in these intimate moments of connection first.
Yes, the early stages of healing, it's important to separate out sexual abuse from sex in terms of your attitudes about sex, your idea of the concept of what sex is. So a lot of time is spent on exploring what is the meaning of sex to you? What are the associations you have with it? And helping develop at least just some kind of basic framework for what healthy sexual relating would look like. And I talk about qualities like consent, equality, respect, trust, safety, having those qualities be operational and knowing how you can achieve those and encourage those in a relationship are very important, like sort of pre-steps before even hand holding. I mean, if you're doing hand holding, you want to make sure it has consent, that there's a sense of equality, that there is trust. So, doing it with non-sexual behaviors or less sexual behaviors, establishing a foundation that sex can come from. There's also changing the self-concept. Like, we talked about how sexual abuse, people can feel like they're objects. You can feel like you have a lower sense of worth and value, or that you're bad because of feelings you might have experienced in the abuse or things like that. And, recognizing you're not alone. It wasn't your fault. You did nothing wrong. All the reactions you've had, whether you went into performance or compulsive sex or pulled back from sex, withdrew or dissociated a lot, those are all understandable reactions to this type of trauma. So these preliminary work is really important. And then I think the main techniques that I developed were the relearning touch exercises. And those are described in the book. And you mentioned drawing on the back as one, and I know I gave you a handout to share with this audience.
And I'll have that on the website at healpodcast.com for those who are listening.
Yeah. And my website, healthysex.com, I have that whole video for relearning touch techniques for free you can watch. And it's not a sex video. It's showing these touch techniques in a very calm and respectful way and with clothes on. So that they move from exercises that can help you develop the ability to breathe, relax, communicate, and experience touch as a way to send and receive respectful feelings and pleasure and love and have fun. So these are all basic skills. Like I said, traditional sex therapy involved sexual activity more, involved genitals right away, or not right away, but pretty much sooner. These techniques are sort of like pre-sensate focus exercises. It's that sense that you can learn how to approach sex differently, mind, body, and relationship.
And there's some, because you were talking about the object, and I want to give the listeners a little view of that. So let's take a little bit of a look of how objectification can start, and it often starts in infancy. What we were discussing before doing this show, as infants, we're primed to expect the breast, expect to nuzzle our mother and see, our mother's face and laugh and giggle. And this is very intimate. This is, it's pleasure for the child. And it's something that they need and, are inherently deserving of when they're born. But let's say the mother is ripping them from the breast and not, and whether even, formula, same thing, whether there's not that connection, that happiness and the flow of connection there, the child starts to feel unsafe. And over time, they start to relate to themselves like there's something wrong with me because I'm not getting my needs met.
And so when we look at attachment theory and how the brain works, how we learn to relate to other people and how we learn to relate to ourselves, is that we learn how to be in connection based on what we learned from our first connection. And so if my connection with my parent, for example, deprived me of pleasure as a child, where I can learn what it's like to experience those intimate moments over and over and over again, if I was deprived from experiencing that, then it makes sense that later on I'm not going to be able to connect with intimacy while feeling safe. It's very threatening for an infant or a child to feel like they aren't getting their basic needs met. This makes them go into survival, which is something that's for another show. And so what a lot of people don't recognize is, that core belief of I'm not good enough, I don't feel worthy enough, almost like we feel inherently flawed. And if someone looks in our eyes for long enough, they might see just how flawed we really are and we're just sort of found out. Well, this could be where this comes from. Because if we don't have our basic human needs met, then that's the foundational piece. If I can't even receive the foundational piece of what it means to be human, then I'm lower than, which means I'm an object. It means I'm less than a human. I am an object. And therefore, I'm being objectified. And in turn, like Wendy's saying, is I may act out what that objectifying piece feels like for me. And I might act that out later on in life at an unconscious level. If our physiology is rooted in threat, it's going to influence narratives that support that physiology to help with defenses, to help the survivor defend themselves. And if this is happening a lot, there's like this closed loop of I feel threatened, I have a defense narrative, and I'm stuck in that. And so it's like you said, if then they're entering sex with an attitude of, this is familiar, this is probably scary, I feel objectified, I just want to leave. I just want to dissociate. Another thing is I might use the strategy of appeasing. I might perform, in other words. I may shut down, and shutting down can look like dissociation and really so appeasing, and it might surrender into the fact that this is scary.
So it's this cycle, and what you're saying is that you titrate into the physiology, into the nervous system and I love what you said, that equality piece. I think that's so important. So you mentioned there's equality, trust, safety.
Consent, respect, equality, trust, and safety. Yes, sexual abuse is a tremendous betrayal of human trust and affection. And certainly there were early experiences in infancy or childhood where there were other experiences of human neglect or betrayal or exploitation. Those can get reactivated and they can compound the experience of trauma and the need for dissociation and pulling back. And a lot of the healing involves reassociation, being able to feel comfortable in your own body. And so we take things slow in healing. And that's why there are these very simple relearning touch exercises and communication exercises where you can create foundations to build sexual relating on so that old automatic reactions and ways of checking out don't just get activated. But those reactions of dissociation in sexual abuse, their survival. Like I remember some of the things people told me. One woman said that when she was sexually abused, she looked up at the ceiling and saw a crack in the ceiling wall. And that's where she went. And then another woman said that she would file her nails when her siblings were abusing her. Things like this, like those activities. If we don't have a prompt like that, we just check out somehow. We just zone out. And to be able to, and those are so understandable and so healthy reactions at the time during trauma and abuse. Mm-hmm. And even denial is afterwards. It's all those things are a way of dealing with something that should never have happened, and it involved human exploitation and betrayal. So you come back into being able to establish healthy basis for a relationship where people are seen as equals, where there is mutual respect, where there's mutual, if it moves into sex, there's mutual desire, the ability to say no. You need to feel empowered and in control of what's happening, both people. So when I say, survivors need to feel, have control over what's happening, it's not like they're ordering their partner around. It's like they feel aware of what their own needs are and able to express them and able to receive a response from the other that is respectful of what their needs are. Those are just core things that do not exist in sexual abuse.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because even the need, like having a need, like I need to feel, like I'm consenting. I need to feel that, right? And I'm just saying I as everybody, but if I'm been traumatized, sometimes just even having that need and connecting to it can be so painful, so challenging to kind of connect to and recognize. Because in a way, if I'm connecting to that need, I also am connecting to the grief and the pain and all the stuff that's on top of it, and in some way. And then to express the need outwardly is to, and this is where that vulnerability piece can kind of come in, but feel like it's accessible to have that need met. So your work is so important in kind of creating not even like safety, but just this foundation of being able to have a sense of, this will be met, and that support, that reassurance, and the training for both people, really.
Right. You're a person. You're entitled to be respected and have your needs met. And you're not an object. Those messages are so critical and important. And to know that yourself. And our culture doesn't help, does it? I mean, we are bombarded all the time, especially females, well, males too, to some extent, and everybody, regardless of gender. But, it's like that you have to look a certain way or speak a certain way, or, and this is what sexy looks like, and this is what attractive is. And pornography, I think, has had, for the most part, it's had some effect on making people think that they have to act like what they see, and that's what sex is. But pornography is all often portrays, not all the time, but it often portrays people as objects, male domination or racial domination of one race over another, and making people be more turned into objects who are used, and you have to perform or act a certain way. And that's not what loving sex is about. Or we all have the capacity. We may not be in touch with it, but we have the capacity, and we can develop this capacity more to be able to relate in a way where our sexuality is an expression of caring and respect and just fun, pleasure, fun, like a celebration of the body and all the feelings that it can have. And and it can bring you closer with your partner in a way where you want to care for your partner more, and you feel not only respected, but like adored, you know?
Yes. Yeah. So a lot of what I do is I work with childhood trauma, so complex trauma. So I see a lot of objectification. And so we go through the triphasic model of, okay, creating safety and going through, some of the past. In NARM, we don't necessarily need to, but NARM, neuroaffective relational model, for those who are new to my podcast, that's the type of therapist I am, is I practice NARM therapy. But in sexual abuse, there's the dissociation, right? A lot of just like when we look at dissociation, it's the BASC acronym. I maybe severed my behavior from consciousness. Maybe I severed my affect from consciousness. Maybe my sensations, my body sensations, I had to sever that during the events. And then, of course, the cognitive knowledge that this is happening to me. I have to kind of sway that away. That's dissociation. We're putting it in, all those emotions related to that. It's getting stored. We're in our safe place. The neural circuitries get created so that we can go into a psyche of shelter, a sheltered psyche. But through your practices, like this can shift. And I think the nervous system can shift, the brain can shift, and a new way of relating to ourselves as, being worthy and, being adored by our partner. And I've hung up on more as that equality piece, just because I think with sexual abuse, I feel like the survivor really didn't feel that piece at all.
It's all about inequality. Sexual abuse is you don't have rights, you don't have voice, your body is just an object for the other to feel, who is using it to feel powerful or for whatever head trip they're on. And it doesn't have to do with you, but it's such an intimate injury. Our sexuality is a key aspect of who we are. It relates to how we feel about our bodies and those special parts of our bodies and sensation and the pleasure capacity. It's just so key. And it has to do with how powerful we feel in the world in general. One of the things that was such a delight in the work that I did was experiencing, having survivors tell me how much more confident they felt. Life in general, at work, in talking to a boss, in talking to a partner, in talking to family members, how stronger they felt and how much more they came to feel worthy. And I think one of the things that's so important is to take the shame that can often automatically come when you're sexually abused, and be able to push that back, put it back, give it to the perpetrator. That's where it belongs. I see it like a hot potato, our culture. Well, why did you wear such a short skirt? Well, you shouldn't have gone to that nightclub. Well, blah, blah, blah. And, there's the shame piece or things that the perpetrator said, and just say, no, that's your business. That's your karma. It's not mine. And you did this to me, but that's not who I am. And you bear the responsibility for what you did. And pulling yourself out from under the way you were disempowered, you don't have to buy into that. And so that feeling of finding your power, your confidence, your assertiveness, your ability to initiate and have pleasurable activities in your life,
Yeah, I love that, because you're sort of going to the fourth stage that was recently added to the triphasic model. So it can't be called triphasic anymore. They'll change that.
It's plastic or whatever.
Yeah, triphasic. Yeah. So the fourth phase is an option, right? It's part of the beyond healing, but it's really the justice piece. What does that justice look like? It doesn't have to be, a court situation. It doesn't have to be that, but It can be, if it's a sibling or family member, it could be boundaries, cutting them out physically from your life, or maybe seeking a different type of justice. Some people use the word forgiveness, which I've done some research on that, and I love what I found, and I don't remember the woman's name. I think I have a PDF of hers, so if I find it, I will put it at healpodcast.com. But with forgiveness, what she talks about is that people feel they have to forgive the abuser in order to move on. And really, the way that this woman breaks it down is that she says, you're not really forgiving them for the acts. The acts are what you're not forgiving. You're forgiving them for being human. The acts, you can, seek justice, add a boundary, do those things. The relationship has changed based on the act that occurred. There's no way of going back to having that same trusting relationship with that person, unless, of course, they're going to do all that work and so forth and help themselves and really change. But when I talk about justice, tell me, how do you see that playing out with your clients?
Yeah, well, I think it's important for people to be able to speak their truth about what happened to them and have that supported and validated by others. I mean, it's like wonderful if that happens with family members, if the abuse happened and involved family members, but even if it didn't involve family members directly, to have that validation from the family can be really helpful. So many times survivors are blamed or told that it didn't really happen, you're making this up, or things like that. And they get horrible reactions. So many times in therapy, and especially in group work, can be wonderful with other survivors and other types of therapy groups where you get that validation. But speaking your truth and being able to express your anger about it, they had no right to treat you like this,
Mm-hmm.
You were entitled to safety. You were entitled to walk wherever you want, whenever you want, and not being sexually abused or be in a family situation and spend the night somewhere and not be sexually abused. And sexual abuse is a horrible problem in our culture. And it's in our media. It's like something that contaminates relationships and society, and to realize that you didn't deserve this. So justice is, it's ideal when the perpetrators experience some consequences, but unfortunately our legal system, our police enforcement systems, and, oftentimes perpetrators get away with it. It's horrible. But even when they are taken into custody and tried and even sent to jail, it doesn't undo what happened, So there's justice. Maybe even they're paying for the survivor's therapy. That can be nice. That can be helpful. Certainly doesn't seem fair that a survivor should have to pay for it, does it? When this was something done to them. But I think there's a sense that to be able to not carry the shame or the blame of what happened. And, Yvonne Dolan was a therapist in my generation who wrote books on resolving sexual abuse. And she was a friend. She used to say, living well is the best revenge. It's like, put your energy. I found this personally to be what works. Putting my energy into just creating a really good life, finding really healthy people to relate to who do share the values that I honor, that I think are important for people to live healthy lives. Move it forward,
Yeah.
The perpetrators got their issues. They have to deal with it. You're probably not going to get the kind of justice, when you have it. I've had situations where I did sessions where the perpetrator and the survivor were in the same room, and the survivor could share his or her feelings and how they were violated, and the perpetrator said, I'm sorry. And it's like they're still left with all these reactions they had developed. And an important piece, if I was to create what justice might look like, it would be for our culture to change, our
Yeah.
society to change, and recognize how we're hurting ourselves by allowing this much sexual abuse to go on and glorified in entertainment.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely echo all of that. And that's too, actually, Herman talks about that with society. It's a huge role. The change is there. So I think you're onto something right there to say that society has to step in and do something. The other piece, ever interesting, first of all, to be sitting in a room with the perpetrator. Like, I can't.
Oh,
with the
yeah. Well,
perpetrator.
perpetrators actually, they're really wounded. They're so wounded themselves
Yeah.
and confused, and they're searching for power, and they're following these patterns that they see that they think, means you're powerful and stuff. And when they get to the point when they are incarcerated or, get the label of a sex offender, or when they grow up and they get older and they have their own children, or their own relationships, then they look back on what they did to a sibling, let's say, years ago. They feel horrible. So, but they have their own healing to do.
Sure.
And, but it's okay to separate from them. It's okay to separate yourself from members of the family who are not supportive.
And a lot of the questions that I come across, just, with different people that I'm meeting with, is, how can we let go of what we can't control? What practices can I do? And it is like you're saying, this like self-love, doing the antidote instead of shaming ourselves, like starting to love ourselves, right? Instead of hearing that critic, it's having compassion for the critic, because that critic once upon a time is trying to keep us safe. So it's really doing the work to love ourselves and letting go of the narrative and the idea, as you say too, like I love that, the attitude towards certain things that really was an attitude that belongs to the past. That was then. This is now. This is my now. I know I can't change this, but what is it that I can do to let go of the tie and the connection that I had with this, so I can start to check things out in another way, in a more, in NARM, call it adult consciousness. So being in my more authentic self versus the self that is in the pain. And it's not to say we're shaming that part. We're actually having a lot of compassion for that pain self, because that pain self developed so many strategies to survive and so many ideas. And, they had to. That's what we all had to do when we had to survive. And so coming into adult consciousness is recognizing all that with compassion and letting go of a lot of the narratives. It's a depth-oriented shift.
People use the term reparenting yourself. And it is all about self-compassion. It's saying to that person that you were back when the abuse happened, I'm so sorry this happened to you, to us. To me.
Yeah.
We didn't deserve it. And you did the best you could to deal with it. And you have options now. You have powers now you didn't feel you didn't have back then. And that was the powerlessness and the helplessness were understandable then. You do have ways to move out of that. You have support services, you have resources, you can become educated in so many ways about how to calm yourself, what the basic skills are for healthy relationships, for healthy self-care. You can even change your nervous system through things like yoga, tai chi, dance, music, breath work. You move in a new direction, but you always have that tender love and caring for that part who suffered abuse in ignorance often. and in powerlessness. And you don't ever abandon that part. When I was a young therapist, I did a lot of Gestalt work, which is a technique where you actually have two chairs and you say, okay, sit in this chair and be the part of you that was abused. And then sit in this chair and be who you are now and create a conversation. And people would get up and switch chairs and talk to themselves. And so many feelings came up and so much deep processing and, crying and weeping for the loss and then sadness about what occurred. A lot of people get stuck in the anger, but and they turn the anger on themselves, but it's not your fault. Wasn't there a movie, Good Will Hunting?
Yes.
Wasn't that the key scene? The therapist said something about, it's not your fault. And you see Damon, what's his
Matt
name?
Damon.
And, he comes to this awareness like, wow, it wasn't my fault.
Yeah. Like I think he had to hear it like 3 times and then it hit and it was like,
Whoa.
yeah.
And it's getting to that place. When you get to that core place, then you can walk hand in hand with yourself. It is compassion. You can give it to yourself if you weren't given it in the past. It's a wonderful feeling of strength and empowerment and freedom and joy with healing. It's very much worth going through it and giving up negative behaviors or self-harm behaviors. We're only here once, right?
Yeah,
I'm more aware of that the older I get.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's one life, and so might as well just do everything you can, especially when you're young, to move beyond the past, not by shoving it down or trying to act as if it didn't happen, but by going into it and doing all the heavy work of processing through it.
Yeah. And before we end, you know what I want to add actually, because, you're living proof of this too, because I know you go to Zumba. You have to skill. You're thriving.
I danced this morning.
All right. There you go.
I biked yesterday, danced today. I went on a walk in the forest.
Yeah, and the thing that I feel there's a lot of pathology around is that when, and this goes to kind of society and also those listening to kind of, if you're a survivor, I want you to know this, whatever kind of trauma that you've gone into, whoever's listening, right? Is that trauma, yes, it changes so much. It changes our physiology. It changes how we relate to things. It's the neurobiology of trauma is something definitely to read and understand, because that's how we can, number one, depathologize. So make people understand why it's not their fault. And they can see all the changes that happen in the brain and nervous system. But the thing is that when we heal from the trauma, when we go through it and we process it, there's actual changes happening in the brain and in the nervous system. So what's happening after that is that we can actually reach what's called post-traumatic growth. And in post-traumatic growth, we have a schema, and this is a silver lining. It's not to say that you need to go through trauma. Like, please don't go get traumatized just so you can get this, because you don't want this. This process is a hard one. But the silver lining is that the post-trauma schema far exceeds the capacity of a pre-trauma schema. So the perspective, the depth, the ability to relate, the wisdom, all of that comes from the healing is actually something that I don't want to sound whatever, but I would never change that. I love that for where I am based on my own healing. We're not just trying to heal to make the symptoms of trauma stop. It's like once you get to your healing, there's so much thriving that can happen, and an identity is flourishing, and connecting to something greater. And so there's not to say it has to be religion, but other things. So
these 3 terms, there's victim, survivor, and then thriver.
yes,
It's getting to that stage where you're able to thrive in life.
yes,
Survivor's good. It's better than victim. You're identifying what happened and that that you lived through it. But there's this other stage where you can actually thrive, which is so worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge and helping us understand how to heal through these touch exercises. Where can people find you?
It's mostly my website, healthysex.com. I put everything in there. There's a whole section on healing from sexual abuse. There's work on recovering from problems caused by pornography. And my husband and I wrote a book on that, the porn trap. And then there's things on connecting sex and love, on overcoming unwanted sexual fantasies and understanding sexual fantasies, which can be a big part in sexual abuse healing. There's free videos, articles, interviews, and there is a contact place. I don't give therapy, but people from time to time will write me and share their stories or how some of the work has impacted them. And that's always sweet.
Nice.
There's a lot of help out there, and it's a matter of just reaching for it.
Well, thank you. And thank you for all that you do.
Thank you very much, too. It's a pleasure talking with you.
Heal Podcast is an educational platform that aims to depathologize trauma through meaningful conversations. None of the information provided is intended to replace conventional therapy, and all listeners are invited to seek their own professional services for their unique concerns. We are thrilled to have our listeners as part of our growing community. We strive to make our conversations as educational as possible and, of course, interruption-free, which is why we do not include advertisements. So with that, I ask that you please subscribe to Heal Podcast, like and share it with your friends, and of course with your social media to support the growth of this channel. I'd love to stay in touch with you, so come follow me on Instagram at Heal Psychotherapy. You can follow me on YouTube, and you can also come visit us at healpodcast.com, where we do give away lots of free resources. You can get a free ebook, and you can also submit a question for our next guest. Last but not least, I'd like to take a moment to thank Jordan Bernard for creating the music for Heal Podcast. And of course, I'd like to thank you so much for being here. And as always, I'm truly rooting for you.